The Catholic Church literally executed people for planting gardens a certain way. Not witchcraft, not heresy. Gardening. And when modern scientists finally tested these forbidden techniques in labs, they found something that made them question everything we teach in agriculture schools today. Medieval monks had a dirty little secret, and I mean literally dirty. They buried fish heads directly under their vegetable rows. Whole fish carcasses, guts, scales, everything. Just shoved them in the soil and planted right on top. Victorian health reformers absolutely lost their minds over this. Unsanitary, they screamed. Cities started banning the practice because neighbors complained about the smell. Can't really blame them there, but here's what those uptight Victorians didn't know. Modern soil scientists ran the numbers. Turns out fish waste releases nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium slowly over months. It's basically a time-release fertilizer capsule that nature designed for free. One salmon head, just one, contains enough nutrients to feed a tomato plant for an entire growing season. Native Americans taught early colonists this exact trick with corn. The colonists used it for years. Then somewhere around the 1800s, they decided it was too primitive and stopped. We literally abandoned genius because it seemed embarrassing. Recent university trials compared fish-fertilized plots against synthetic fertilizers. The fish plots produced 20% higher yields. 20%. Those monks weren't just gardening, they were outperforming modern chemistry with rotting fish parts. Today, backyard gardeners are quietly bringing this back. No fancy labels, no marketing budgets, just burying fish scraps like it's 1453. But fish heads are honestly tame compared to what comes next, because medieval farmers also took gardening advice from the moon. Here's where things get a little weird. Medieval farmers would check the moon before planting anything. Root vegetables went into the ground during waning moons. Leafy greens? Waxing moons only. They followed almanacs like their harvests depended on it, and the church absolutely hated this. During the Reformation, authorities burned moon calendars right alongside astrology books, called it witchcraft, pagan nonsense, the kind of thing that gets you in serious trouble. But here's the thing. Scientists actually tested this, and they found something nobody expected. The moon's gravitational pull affects soil moisture. Same force that moves oceans, it's tugging at the water in your garden soil too. During full moons, moisture gets drawn upward toward plant roots. German researchers ran controlled studies. Root crops planted in the third lunar quarter showed 12% better germination rates. 12%? That's not nothing. My grandfather always planted by the moon. I thought he was just being old-fashioned. Turns out he was being scientific before science caught up. Now here's the funny part. Those California biodynamic farms following medieval moon schedules, they're charging premium prices at farmers markets. People literally pay extra for vegetables planted according to calendars our ancestors got persecuted for using. The gravitational effect on plant sap works like ocean tides. Subtle, but measurable over a full growing season. And speaking of things that sound like witchcraft, but actually work, now here's where things get genuinely strange. Medieval monks would take a cow horn, stuff it full of fresh manure, bury it in the ground all winter, then dig it up in spring. They'd stir that funky horn contents into their watering buckets. Sounds like witchcraft, right? Tudor authorities thought so too. They actually banned this practice, lumping it in with occult rituals. The horn shape itself made officials nervous. Too symbolic. Too suspicious. But here's what nobody understood back then. That horn isn't just a container, it's a fermentation chamber. The curved structure, the specific density of horn material, creates conditions where beneficial bacteria multiply like crazy. We're talking concentrations 100 times higher than regular compost. I'll be honest, when I first read about this, I thought it was complete nonsense. Then I saw the laboratory results. These bacteria produce natural growth hormones during decomposition. The slow, cold process over winter months allows chemical reactions that simply don't happen in a regular compost pile. Rudolf Steiner brought this technique back in the 1920s. Today, certified biodynamic wines made using horn preparations sell for triple the price of conventional bottles. One properly prepared horn treats an entire acre of farmland. The monks weren't practicing magic. They were running a biological reactor 5 centuries before anyone invented that term. Speaking of forbidden practices, this next one got people arrested for laziness. Medieval peasants did something that got them in actual trouble with their landlords. They let stinging nettles grow right next to their vegetables, on purpose. Estate managers in the 1600s would ride through and see nettle patches, then order them ripped out immediately. Nettles meant lazy farming, worthless weeds, a sign the peasant wasn't working hard enough. Except those peasants were actually geniuses. Here's what the lords didn't understand. Nettles are basically free fertilizer machines. As their leaves drop and decompose, they release iron, nitrogen, and silica directly into the surrounding soil. Your cabbages just sit there absorbing nutrients they never asked for. But wait, it gets better. Aphids absolutely love nettles. Like obsessively. They'll choose nettles over your tomatoes every single time. So while those little green vampires are busy destroying your nettle patch, your actual food crops stay completely untouched. The nettles take one for the team. And the beneficial insect thing? One single nettle plant attracts over 40 species of helpful bugs. Ladybugs, hoverflies, predatory wasps. It's like running a pest control company without paying employees. Modern permaculture consultants now charge hundreds of dollars to teach people exactly where to put their nettles. The same knowledge illiterate peasants had for free 600 years ago. Sometimes the weeds know more than we do. Speaking of things our ancestors knew about liquid gold, what they did with their own bodies might shock you. Here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. Medieval gardeners used pee on their vegetables. Yeah, human urine. Diluted it down, poured it right on their cabbages and leeks. The Victorians absolutely lost their minds over this one. Called it disease-spreading filth. Banned it faster than you can say chamber pot. But here's what they didn't know. Urine is sterile when it leaves your body, completely clean, and it contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in almost the exact ratio that fertilizer companies spend millions trying to formulate in labs today. Nature just hands it to you for free, every single day. The wealthy families in Renaissance Italy, they actually paid servants to collect chamber pot contents, specifically for their kitchen gardens. These weren't peasants too poor to know better. These were rich people who understood value when they saw it. Now let's talk numbers. One adult produces enough urine in a year to fertilize 400 square feet of vegetables. That's a decent backyard plot, fed for free, by something you're literally flushing away. Swedish researchers finally tested this properly. Crops fertilized with urine contained 0 harmful pathogens, matched synthetic fertilizers. Sometimes beat them. The practice only died because indoor plumbing made it inconvenient, not because it stopped working. Several European cities now run official pee cycling programs, government approved. But urine wasn't the only liquid medieval gardeners were brewing. What they made next might surprise you even more. Monastery herbalists were basically the original mad scientists. They'd toss comfrey, tansy, and wormwood into buckets of water, let the whole mess rot for weeks, then spray it on their crops. The smell? Absolutely horrific. The results? Garden pests dropped dead. Here's what they stumbled onto. These fermented plant teas contain natural pyrethrins and saponins. Fancy words, simple job. They dissolve insect exoskeletons on contact. Brutal way to go if you're an aphid. Perfectly safe if you're eating the vegetables later. My grandmother used to make something similar with nettle leaves, left it brewing in her shed until neighbors complained about the stench. That woman grew tomatoes the size of softballs. Now here's where things get interesting. When chemical pesticides hit the market in the early 1900s, industrial agriculture spent serious money convincing everyone that homemade solutions couldn't be trusted. Only laboratory products were legitimate. Only factory formulas worked. Convenient argument when you're selling factory formulas, right? Recent studies tell a different story. Fermented nettle tea kills 80% of aphids while leaving bees and butterflies completely unharmed. Try finding a commercial pesticide with that track record. Those monks ran experiments centuries before anyone invented the scientific method. Generations of trial and error. Meticulous observation. Recipes passed down through handwritten manuscripts. And we threw it all away for convenience in a spray can. But speaking of ancient growing systems, we abandoned too quickly. Now here's where European monks got humbled by indigenous American farmers. The Three Sisters method, corn, beans, and squash planted together. Monks who visited the Americas saw this and immediately started copying it back home. Smart move. But colonial authorities? They called it culturally backward, and pushed monoculture instead. Worst agricultural advice in history. Here's the genius nobody wanted to admit. Corn grows straight up like a natural trellis. Beans climb right up those stalks. No stakes needed, no string, no labor. The corn doesn't care, and the beans get exactly what they want. But wait, there's more. And this is where it gets wild. Those bean roots aren't just sitting there, they're hosting bacteria that grab nitrogen straight from the air and convert it into plant food. The beans are literally manufacturing fertilizer underground while they grow. For free. While you sleep. Then squash enters the picture. Those giant leaves spread across the soil like a living blanket. Weeds can't compete. Moisture stays locked in. Summer droughts become manageable instead of devastating. The numbers don't lie. This combination produces more calories per acre than any single crop grown alone. Modern agricultural studies confirmed this decades ago. So why did land-grant universities ignore it for over a century? Pride, mostly. Nobody wanted to admit that primitive farmers had outsmarted their expensive research programs. Speaking of things universities dismissed too quickly, medieval charcoal makers knew something about soil that we're just now understanding. All right, here's something that'll make you rethink every bonfire you've ever had. Medieval charcoal burners had a side hustle. After making charcoal for blacksmiths, they sold the leftover burnt bits to gardeners. Just the scraps, the stuff nobody wanted. Turns out those scraps were gold. See, charcoal isn't just burnt wood. Under a microscope, it looks like a honeycomb hotel. Millions of tiny pockets and tunnels. And beneficial bacteria absolutely love checking in. We're talking billions of microorganisms in a single handful, all working to break down nutrients and feed your plants. But that's not even the impressive part. Amazon rainforest farmers used this exact technique thousands of years ago. They created what scientists call terra preta, black earth so fertile that plots are still producing crops 2,000 years later. Same method, different continent, separated by an ocean and centuries. Makes you wonder who figured it out first. Then came synthetic fertilizers promising instant results. Why spend weeks burning wood when you can just pour chemicals from a bag? Forest conservation laws restricted burning anyway. The practice nearly disappeared. Nearly. Cornell University now runs an entire research program dedicated to biochar. Fancy name, same concept. They're essentially proving what peasant farmers knew through pure observation and patience. And biochar does something synthetic fertilizers can't touch. But to understand that, we need to talk about water, specifically flooding your garden on purpose. Here's something that sounds completely backwards. Medieval farmers would flood their gardens on purpose. In winter, with freezing cold water. I know. Every gardening book tells you drainage is king. Victorian engineers certainly thought so. They drained millions of acres across Europe, calling the old flooding systems primitive and mosquito-infested. But here's what those engineers missed. Cold floodwater sitting on top of soil actually warms what's underneath. The water acts like a blanket, keeping root zones several degrees warmer than the frozen air above. Plants wake up weeks earlier in spring, and the benefits don't stop there. Every time water floods across land, it drops silt. Free fertilizer, delivered by gravity. No bags to buy, no spreaders to push, just minerals settling exactly where roots can find them. The medieval water meadow systems were engineering marvels, honestly. Channels, sluice gates, careful timing. These farmers controlled flooding like surgeons control scalpels. Then along came modern drainage. Suddenly, wet was bad. Standing water meant disease. Progress meant pipes carrying every drop away as fast as possible. Funny thing happened next. Those drained fields started needing more fertilizer, more irrigation in summer, more inputs to replace what flooding provided for free. Now restoration projects across England are reopening those medieval flood channels. The results? Hay yields beating conventional fields without a single purchased input. Zero fuel, zero equipment, just gravity and patience. Speaking of patience, the next technique requires almost none. Here's something that sounds impossible until you see it. Medieval orchard keepers would take one apple tree and graft 5, 6, sometimes 7 different varieties onto it. One trunk, multiple personalities, like a fruit-producing Frankenstein, except it actually worked beautifully. Commercial nurseries later killed this practice. Why? because harvesting becomes complicated when your apples ripen at different times. Can't send a crew through once and strip everything. Too messy, too inefficient. But here's what those efficiency experts missed. That mess was the entire point. Early varieties ripen in July, mid-season in September, late keepers in November. One tree gives you fresh apples for 6 months instead of 3 weeks of overwhelming glut followed by nothing. And pollination? Different varieties bloom at slightly different times. More bloom windows means more chances for bees to do their work. Fruit set goes up dramatically. I've got a neighbor with a tree his grandfather grafted back in the 50s. Thing produces golden, delicious Granny Smiths and some heirloom variety nobody can identify anymore. All from one rootstock that's been quietly doing its job for 7 decades. The disease resistance angle surprised me most. If blight hits one variety, the others might shrug it off completely. You lose a branch, not your whole tree. Today, nurseries sell fruit salad trees using these exact medieval techniques. Charge premium prices for knowledge that monks gave away free. But grafting fruit, that's child's play compared to something even more fundamental they understood. Here's where things get a little personal. My grandmother kept seeds in old mason jars, hundreds of them, labeled with handwriting I could barely read. She'd walk through her garden every harvest, picking tomatoes only from the plants that grew strongest, the ones that survived drought, the ones bugs left alone. That wasn't just tradition, that was genetic engineering before we called it that. For centuries, peasant farmers did exactly the same thing. They never saved seeds randomly. They chose the survivors, the winners. Generation after generation, this created what scientists call landrace varieties. Plants perfectly adapted to their specific patch of dirt. A traditional wheat variety might carry genetic resistance to 20 different diseases. Commercial hybrids, 3 or 4, maybe. And the weird part is, saving your own seeds became legally questionable. Starting in the 1930s, seed patents changed everything. Buy seeds from a company and suddenly replanting from your harvest might violate their intellectual property. Generations of farming wisdom essentially criminalized overnight. The Irish potato famine wasn't just bad luck. Farmers had abandoned diverse seed saving for a single high-yielding variety. When blight hit, every plant was equally vulnerable. No genetic diversity meant no survivors. Those heirloom tomatoes selling for $5 each at farmers' markets? Medieval peasants developed them for free. But seeds aren't the only thing we threw away too quickly. Some amendments we tossed came straight from the blacksmith's forge. Blacksmiths were basically running a fertilizer factory and didn't even know it. Every medieval forge produced slag, this weird glassy leftite from heating metal. Most people today would toss it in the garbage, but medieval gardeners, they crushed it up and worked it straight into their soil. Same deal with fireplace ash. Nothing got wasted. Then industrial farming showed up with its fancy packaged products. Suddenly slag and ash were inconsistent, unreliable, too simple to trust, apparently. Here's what kills me, though. Wood ash contains potassium carbonate. You know what else contains potassium carbonate? That bag of potash fertilizer at the garden center that costs $15. Same stuff, different packaging, much bigger markup. And slag? It releases calcium and iron slowly over multiple growing seasons, basically doing what expensive soil amendments do, except it came free from the local blacksmith. My grandfather used to dump his fireplace ash on the vegetable patch every winter. Neighbors thought he was lazy. His tomatoes told a different story. Modern studies at agricultural stations confirm ash-treated plots produce around 15% more root vegetables than untreated ones. 15%. From garbage. But here's where regulations got weird. Safety rules started restricting ash application near food crops. Centuries of safe use apparently meant nothing. The beautiful part? Medieval households generated enough ash just from cooking and heating to treat their entire garden. Zero waste. Zero cost. Speaking of free resources, the next technique required doing absolutely nothing at all. Here's the thing about modern farming. We run our soil like it's a machine. Plant, harvest, year after year. No breaks. Medieval farmers would have called us insane. They left a full third of their land completely empty every single year. No crops, no planting, just nothing. The 3-field rotation system meant every plot got a vacation. Sounds wasteful, right? Industrial agriculture certainly thought so. Why let land sit idle when chemicals can keep it productive? Fertilizers became the substitute for rest. But here's what those chemicals couldn't replace. During fallow years, soil biology rebuilds itself. Fungal networks that take decades to establish, they recover. Beneficial bacteria populations explode. The underground ecosystem essentially hits the reset button. And there's a sneaky bonus. Weeds germinate during fallow periods because they think it's their time to shine. Then farmers plow them under before they can set seed. The weeds basically commit agricultural suicide. Brilliant, honestly. Now look at industrial farmland. Yields declining despite increasing fertilizer applications. Soil structure collapsing. Organic matter disappearing. My grandfather used to say you can't sprint forever. Eventually, your legs give out. Same principle applies to dirt. Regenerative agriculture experts are finally admitting what peasants understood 800 years ago. Rested soil produces better harvests the following season than exhausted soil pumped full of synthetic supplements. But medieval farmers didn't just understand rest. They also mastered water in ways that make modern irrigation look incredibly wasteful. You know what's funny? We spend thousands on irrigation systems when medieval gardeners just grabbed shovels and dug down. Sunken beds. Simple as that. Instead of building up, they built down. Here's the genius part. When you dig a bed below ground level, every raindrop in the area drains toward your plants. It's like creating a tiny valley that collects water your neighbor's gardens waste. But rain is just half the story. Morning dew forms on everything, right? In a raised bed, that moisture evaporates before your coffee cools. In a sunken bed, dew rolls down the walls and pools at your plant roots. Free water every single morning, even during dry spells. And those walls, they block wind. That alone cuts evaporation by 50%. Your soil stays moist while everyone else's turns to dust. Colonial settlers looked at these beds and called them primitive. Too proud to dig down, I guess. Meanwhile, Zuni and Hopi farmers grew corn in deserts with just 12 inches of annual rainfall. 12 inches. That's barely enough to fill a kiddie pool. Now, California gardeners are rediscovering this trick as water restrictions bite harder every summer. Turns out primitive beats expensive irrigation system when your water bill looks like a mortgage payment. But saving water is only part of sustainable gardening. The real medieval secret? They never separated their vegetables from something we now keep far, far away. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. We separated animals from gardens and created a massive problem that didn't need to exist. Medieval homesteads ran chickens and pigs right through their vegetable plots, rotating them, timing it perfectly. The chickens would scratch up pest larvae, demolish weed seedlings, and leave behind fertilizer exactly where next year's crops would grow. Pigs rooted the soil to 12 inches deep without compacting the subsoil like tractors do. Free labor, free pest control, free fertilizer. Then health regulations in the early 1900s decided animals near food production was dangerous. Zoning laws followed. Suddenly, this 1,000-year-old system became illegal in most places. And what happened next? We had to invent synthetic fertilizers to replace what the animals had been providing for free. We needed pesticides because the chickens weren't eating the bugs anymore. We bought tillers because the pigs weren't doing the digging. Joel Salatin's Polyface farm uses medieval-style animal rotation today. He earns $3,000 per acre. Conventional farms nearby, $150 per acre. Same land, same climate, different approach. My grandfather kept 3 chickens in his backyard garden until the city made him stop. His tomatoes were never the same after. The complete separation of animals from vegetable gardens might be the most expensive regulatory decision in agricultural history. We banned the solution, then spent a century buying substitutes.